Welcome back to Behind the Curtain of Healthcare. We were joined by physician financial planner Kyle Musleh. Kyle covered the common misconceptions surrounding student loans, when to start worrying about them, things you could do, and how to reach your goals. If you'd like to contact Kyle, you can find his information below, and if you'd like to be a guest, please let us know. Welcome back to Behind the Curtain of Healthcare. Tonight our guest is Kyle Musleh. Kyle's a partner at Musleh Financial Group, a nationwide financial planning firm dedicated entirely for physicians. The business itself was founded by Kyle's father, Ed Musleh, in 1987. Kyle entered the business in 2011 and has since coached numerous residents, fellows, and students on financial topics most impacting physicians, including debt and student loan issues, goal planning, home buying, insurance planning, and many other topics associated with financially surviving training. Kyle spends much of his professional time in personal meetings with medical students, residents, and fellows. He has also been invited as a guest speaker at medical schools and residency programs across the nation to discuss topics such as those mentioned previously. He can be reached on his LinkedIn, Facebook, and we'll put all his contact information down in the description. Welcome to the show, Kyle. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, you too.
So with the news, I think out of that list, I think the most contentious one these days is debt and student loan issues. So we could jump right into that one.
Yeah, that's a big topic. It's pretty much a monster. Essentially, a majority of my time is spent this time of year actually starting when people start matching into residencies all the way up to July, just focusing on that. Student loans have taken on a life of their own pretty much recently, and with the different variations, you have so many types that it gets confusing. Most students, most residents, most doctors really don't know what they've gotten into, or they do and then they forget about it willfully. So there's a mountain of information to go off of. What I'll try to do is break it down and make it easy and comprehensible essentially tonight.
So Kyle, let me ask you, I've been in healthcare recruiting in the healthcare space for over 16 years, and I think I know the answer, but what would you say on average? And I think it has no bearing on what someone trained in. It's just a matter of student loan debt for medical school and so forth. On average, what are you seeing the most residents are facing these days when they come out of training?
The average resident, probably they start out in residency right around 220. It can get up there to 270. There are some people that are fortunate enough to come out with nothing. I've seen monstrous amounts of debt entering residency, as much as 500,000. Which is absolutely incredible. And those people are the ones that, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but are looking at PSLF because they're scared, and rightfully so.
Yeah, a lot of the residents I talk to, and I know you're going to get into the topics, if they feel like they can't get some relief from an employer or from a program, they virtually have one or two mortgages that they're paying without the home. Without the roof. So, I mean, you know that because this is what you do so well. But and if you were to ask me, I was honestly thinking closer to the 3 to 350 range seems to be so common these days. Mm-hmm. And very recently, I spoke to an OBGYN who had 450 in student loan debt. And anyway, I don't want to steal your thunder, but I was just curious what you were seeing as kind of the industry averages right now.
Yeah, 350 isn't uncommon. Honestly, I'll see it up in the 270 range a lot more. I deal with physicians on in all specialties and all spectrums. So that's, I would say, the average of what I see. It could be higher than that if we actually did an analysis on, took down the numbers. But based upon my experience, that's common.
Do you find that that whether somebody has an MD or a DO, that their training may have cost more? Are you seeing any correlation there between those two, or not really? Or what are the correlations you see as to why somebody's student loan debt? Do you kind of get granular with them, or do you just more take an overview and say, okay, here's the debt and here are the the consulting options we can provide?
Well, typically by the time I get in, it's really not important where they took it out, what's important is understanding what they have. So I really don't take a look at hindsight, because we can't do anything about that. We're looking at how do we move forward. And that's a whole process of me getting involved is, all right, let's take an overview of where we stand. What are the different loans we have? Are they all government loans? Are they private? Through private banks? Are they family loans? Because you can get a myriad of different options and myriad of different things. What else? In relation to your question, I don't think there is a correlation between DO or MD, at least in my experience. And the reason why I say that, here in Indianapolis, and I'm based in Indianapolis at IU, there you have pretty much the same cost as Marian, if not a little less. Marian University is a DO school, and it's a private DO school. So it can get more expensive on that end. It just really depends on where you are, if you're in state, out of state, all those things, for medical school specifically. So not really, I'm not seeing a real big correlation.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I haven't researched it,
So what's a typical guidance session look like when you talk to someone about their individual student loans? It seems there's a lot to it.
All right. Well, what I try to do is I'll try to actually get a list of their loans first. As I said before, we break it down, we go through, we take a look at where they stand, what the loans are, what their interest rates are, how much interest they have, the balances, and what they've done. If they're a new really graduating student going into residency, they haven't done much. So we'll look and see, all right, what's going to be the best plan for you? Are we sticking with the government plan? May it be in your interest to actually look at refinancing? Typically going into residency, not the case. We can get into that a little bit later. But if you are a graduating resident or a fellow going into the job market, it's really going to depend upon the contract. So what I'll do is I'll go through the contract, take a look at the finances, break it down. All right, let's take a look at the goal planning then and what your budget looks like, because the budget's going to dictate all our options. All right. It's really what I call the game plan of any financial decision we make, because if it works in your budget and your budget's balanced, then we could consider other options. But with the actual student loans, what I'll do is I'll take a look, just like I said with the residents, break it down. But here we actually say, all right, what are the goals? When do we want to be debt free? 5 years, 7 years? Can we do that with the government, or are we going to really rely on the PSLF? And this is the goal aspect is really dictating everything. And it's also the belief in the government system and what's been put out there. Right now, there is a lot of disbelief in PSLF. And let me take a step back. PSLF is short for Public Service Loan Forgiveness. That's a 10-year program set up by the federal government to forgive individuals, essentially anyone working in a public institution, non-for-profit, their loans if they make 120 consecutive payments. All right. So we have to take a look at all the options on the table and really go in and decipher their goals and say, all right, if that is your goal, how do we get there?
So Kyle, is the only qualifying aspect is it has to be a not-for-profit employer? Is that the key driving metric, if you will, or for them to comply, or are there any other components that fall into that?
It falls under a tax code, and for whatever reason, the tax code number is actually escaping me, but it is essentially, if we're going in layman terms, it is non-for-profit. It has to be a non-for-profit and government-sanctioned non-for-profit working for the public service. The whole idea behind this plan is we were trying to get people back to work after the recession. And how do we get people back to work who are highly educated? Is there are government jobs out there. So we get them, or public institution jobs. So if they give up some of their time, because most of these opportunities were lower paying than that in the private sector, they have a little bit of benefit. So what I have seen is, with that in mind, and let's take a step back. You have to remember that this program really wasn't designed for physicians in the first place. It wasn't designed with physicians taking the intent. It got to that point when I think people started realizing, oh, wait, I actually work for a non-for-profit. Can I take advantage of this? So that's really where the whole system is coming from, and why could be potentially a lot of strife in the future. A lot of public opinion towards physicians, and this is what I tell my physicians. They don't understand it. They think physicians are making a ton of money hand over fist, and they have no worries in the world. And that's just not the case. No one in their right mind would voluntarily give up 40 plus hours for at least a minimum of 3 years in residency to trade places, plus an additional 220 to 275, could be even 400,000, like we were talking about, in debt. But with general ignorance comes a lot of mass media dissemination, because that's what sells. So you may start seeing people get angry over public service loan forgiveness when these loans do start coming in and getting forgiven. But there's more stuff to talk about along that, especially with the election coming up, especially with the budget that just got released. And I could get into that. I don't know if you want to follow this line of thought a little bit more.
Well, I know we kind of want to have the focus on healthcare. So as it relates, I think that would be helpful.
Okay. So keeping along the public service line as it relates to physicians, it's a fantastic plan. It's a fantastic idea, and I hope it's there for everybody. What you have right now is you really have a perfect storm of events that's leading to a lot of unknowns. We have the current president, and again, I'm not going to get political. That's not the goal here. The current president yesterday, and today is December 12th, released his budget for, sorry, not December, February 12th, a couple months behind. He released his budget for 2021. In that, he was looking at defunding or taking funding away from education, the Department of Education, which also includes the PSLF, and it might look to actually strike PSLF. He has done this before, and he's looked to change the different plans inside of paying for student loans, the income-driven repayment plans, which we haven't even talked about yet. Doesn't mean that that's going to go through. It's a toss-up, but the future of that is always murky, because what you have to do is you have to get congressional approval, and really no congressman wants to put their name on the person and say, hey, we killed public service loan forgiveness. It's not a great selling point. So it didn't get through the last time. My idea is it's probably not going to get through this time. But you also have Democratic candidates running in this current election who are looking at forgiveness as a main talking point. Some of them are looking to forgive things entirely. Others are looking to forgive things up to a certain income threshold, kind of like the income tax. They'll forgive up to $50,000. Some of the candidates are proposing, we'll forgive $50,000 in debt if you earn less than X. So it's a needs-based. Others are looking at, we're probably just going to keep it the same way, or we're going to provide an additional subsidy and change things up a little bit. It's really murky at this point in time. So what I'm telling my clients as they're coming out and contemplating about PSLF, refinancing, which way do we go when we're in practice? At this moment, and as we go towards November, I'm going to tell them we may want to wait and see where this train actually ends, because who knows, someone could get elected and it could be gone that day. At least that could be that's a promises. Whether or not they fulfill the promises, we all know that's a whole nother story, and it's a whole nother can of worms.
And that PSLF as well, if you want to just explain it briefly, the physician has to be very timely with their payments over my understanding. Maybe you want to explain that as well, because there are some nuances that could throw them out of cycle that disqualify them. Am I thinking correctly on that?
Yeah, there are. So PSLF goes down, and basically you need to be in an income-driven repayment system to qualify. It's not the technical rule, but realistically, there's no other way you're going to qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Income-driven repayment systems are the typical systems most residents or physicians enter as they enter into residency. We're talking about different things called pay-as-you-earn, repay, IBR, all different equations. That's all those things are. It's different equations of how you pay off your student loans, but it's all derived from how much income you earn. Pay as you earn and repay are 10% of your discretionary income. And IBR is 15%. What is discretionary income? This is where it gets tricky to explain without actually showing people things. But discretionary income is essentially 150% of your adjusted gross income. For all intents and purposes of this discussion, let's talk about that as your gross income. Minus 150% of the federal poverty line. You multiply that by the percentage, and that's whether it's 10% with pay as you earn or repay, or 15% with IBR, and that's the output. That's the annual output of how much you should be paying back with these systems. All right. You can get your monthly, obviously, by dividing that by 12. But once you're in one of these systems, you need to be sending in a declaration that you are working. It's called an employer certification form, and anybody can find it just by Google searching Public Service Loan Forgiveness Employer Certification Form. All right. What that is essentially saying, hey, I am working for a public institution, non-for-profit. And you go, and once you find it, you send that in, and you need to send that in almost every year. It's not a requirement. It's recommended, because if you don't, there's going to be a painful process of finding out, going back and dealing with the government, hey, I've actually worked for a non-for-profit, and then they're going to ask, all right, let's see all your taxes for the last 10 years. Let's see all your W-2s. Let's see all your pay stubs. It's not fun. It's painful, and you can read a lot of articles online about it. So going through that process, you need to make sure you're in one of those. Now, there are actually individual loans that qualify to be in those plans and qualify for PSLF. So it gets really, really nuanced. If I can take a snippet without getting too much in the weeds here, what I would say is you really want all your loans to be direct loans. All right. If it's got direct in front of the name, we're good. If it doesn't have direct in front of the name, we really need to consider potentially consolidating the loans and creating a direct loan so that it will qualify, or taking a look at different courses of actions.
So can somebody, if a physician, let's say, decided they wanted to work initially out of training for a for-profit location, They worked there for 3 years, can they then go to a not-for-profit and apply for PSLF so they're not disqualified because they started out in the for-profit sector?
Yeah, they don't need to be 120 consecutive payments. They just have to be 120 payments.
Okay.
Now, whether it's going to be beneficial for them because they were in the for-profit sector and their income may have been higher, they just lost out on 3 years. So that would take some analysis to see, all right, what's the opportunity cost here? But they can do it. It's a legitimate question. I get that question quite a lot, actually. One of the things that I brought up, and I need to explain this a little bit more, because this is a common misconception of, and common misunderstanding of loans. Consolidation is not the same as refinancing. Consolidation is putting all your loans in together. And I mentioned consolidation before, that's why I'm bringing this up. It's essentially putting all your loans together into one loan. That one loan will have a new interest rate. That interest rate is the weighted average. But that can be done through the federal government. Refinancing is something you do through a private bank or a private lender. Once you do that, all this government stuff about public service loan forgiveness, about the benefits of, hey, if you die, your spouse won't have to pay back the loan. Mm-hmm. That's gone. That's off the table.
So there are some significant mistakes that someone could make that critically alter their trajectory of obligation or the options that they've got.
Yes, if they don't understand what they're doing. I've had people say, hey, I'm trying to refinance. I said, no, that's not what we want to do right now. We're not in that position. We haven't even discussed that. Let's take a step back and see if your goals align with that.
So if we were to just ask just kind of a general question, if there is such a thing as what are the most common misunderstandings or errors or the kind of things that you see more frequently than others that you've got to kind of re-explain or maybe explain to somebody for the first time when you sit and do a consult with them?
So one of them I just mentioned, refinancing and consolidation, huge difference. Most people aren't aware of it. And along those lines, we have this bias that we think we know what we want to do. Before anybody talks to us, this is the way we want to go because that's what my buddy said. But who knows if your buddy got that information correct, or he was leaning on someone else to do their research. People really just rely on what's been done and what they've been told versus actually do the research for themselves, which causes a lot of issues.
I want to start dancing because I love this rant.
But it's true. It's true in all aspects of life.
Yeah.
In student loans, it can be detrimental. So, for example, pay versus repay. They're not that different. They're the exact same equation, but there are common things that people don't understand. And they say, well, because they're the same equation, I'm just going to choose one and not even worry about it. No, that can cause us to pay more over time. It can cause issues. Two of the main differences here, pay as you earn. You can actually file separately from your spouse and reduce the amount you pay, whether that makes sense tax-wise. That's something for you and your financial advisor to talk about. That's not something I would go into a discussion and make that decision lightly. Repay. The government actually gives you a 50% uncovered interest stipend. And it's not really even a stipend. They just wipe off 50% of the uncovered interest. So the interest accumulates less. What uncovered interest is essentially your payment. Any interest that you accumulate on a monthly basis over your payment, the government will half that at minimum with repay. And that can save us on interest over time. But some people will go in and with blinders on and say, oh, they're the same exact equation. I read it on paper. And totally just ignore the other aspects of it. And that can cause them to, pay a little bit more over time or make the wrong decision, pay more in taxes. The problem with student loans is it's so nuanced, it's connected to almost every other aspect of finance. It's very, very important to at least have someone in your corner who knows what they're doing. Because for me, I've been doing this since 2013. To actually get a handle on student loans and really understand it, it really took me about 3 years doing it full time to really get the ins and outs of it. And that could all change tomorrow. Who knows?
So
but if you were what we have right now,
if you were a resident or a fellow, when would you be recommending Kyle should be thinking about talking to someone about their student loan obligations and appropriate management? How early? And you probably maybe will say it's never too early, And maybe
I was going to say yesterday, but
yeah, maybe the equation is more, well, don't wait too late, and too late would be here. But what do you recommend as far as somebody really getting educated so that they can roadmap what's their best route?
I'll tell you what I do. I am currently advising fourth-year medical residents on this stuff. So now, I mean, as soon as possible. If you're in residency and you don't know what you have, you need to learn about it ASAP. You either talk to someone, start reading. There's a lot of information online, but it's really difficult to understand if you do not have that financial background.
I'm thinking that's intentional, Kyle.
I think it is. I really do.
It's like the car commercial with the quick blah, 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 all the fine print at the bottom that nobody really follows. But
oh yeah, I could get off on tangents about how I think that there could be better ways to promote this stuff, better ways to disseminate the information, but we got to deal with the cards we are dealt. So my recommendation is to talk to somebody who knows what they're doing and is around student loans. I do budget spreadsheets for people. It takes me literally 5 minutes to go through someone's student loans, where just because I've done it so much, it's repetition. And I'll do these consults for free because it's so important. It's a part of that financial process that most people really don't understand. And understanding it is going to alleviate so many problems down the line. My goal, and really the way we started our business, was really just to help the physicians understand where they're going and help them reach their goals in a more timely fashion. Really, financial independence, because I've seen so many issues along those lines. I've seen people coming out with credit cards on top because they max out their student loans. That's a mistake that I see, but you can't do anything about that in residency. Hopefully, medical schools are not promoting that. Hopefully, there are better ways to deal with that.
No, they have banks that pick up that slack, that happily promote use of plastic. One thing that's kind of, if I peel it back a little bit also, Kyle, I think about the trend for medical students and where they decide to take their residencies to. And some, I think, of over time I've spoken to, I'll ask someone, why did you get into your specialty?
Yeah.
And sometimes it was truly a magical mentor or an experience that they had, that there was really an inner calling that resonated with them as they're doing their rotations, trying to figure out what they want to specialize in. But I think part of the driver as well is because of the money that's available to make in some of your surgical and some of your subspecialties. And these family medicine, internal medicine physicians are facing the same debt crisis that a high-end specialist will. And I do believe those pressures do influence them to some extent when they think about how much money can I earn over a lifetime. So it is harder to find. Primary care shortage is huge. Those physicians are not compensated the same. Anyone in healthcare knows that. So those are all compelling pressures that aren't just post-residency, but I think on some level shape the direction that some physicians decide to take in the first place.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you there. It's definitely a component. I would like to say that everyone I meet doesn't have that in the back of their mind. I want to think that almost all my physicians that I deal with are completely focused, and I think a majority of them are, on the healthcare and helping. But that's scary. It really is. And as we get into the fourth year of medical school, it becomes real, because now we have to start paying for it. And that's when people start interviewing, and some people have made the wrong decisions. When I say wrong decisions, they did something because of the money driver, which in my experience is even though I work in finance, that money driver can be extremely beneficial, but if that's all you're focusing on, then burnout is a really, really big factor.
Yeah.
It's one of my key points. I'm going to have a lecture actually next week at the University of Louisville for medical students, really around the University of Louisville. We're going to go to a brewery and have a casual thing. But
where's my invite, Kyle? I don't think I saw it yet.
You're more than welcome to come. You're more than welcome to attend.
Okay.
But we're gonna talk about that. Burnout is because residents work so darn hard. Some of them work 80 plus hours a week. You need to take vacations. You need to prioritize things. But if there's this back of your mind nagging that, oh, I'm only doing this because of the money, I'm only doing this because of the money, it's a lot easier to get there. You got to do what you love, and the money. I know it sounds cliche, and you don't expect a financial advisor to say this sort of thing. People in physicians will make good money if they make good choices. They will survive the debt aspect of it. One thing that is super crucial today is the mental health aspect of medicine, and I think that goes unnoticed a lot.
Agreed.
Sorry, and that's a tangent that I'm super passionate about, but and we don't really have the time, I don't think, to get into all that stuff, and it's really not my professional expertise. So,
but agreed.
Away.
No, it's another whole topic we will be covering one night on a session. Is mental health among physicians and burnout? Mm-hmm. And to your point, Kyle, it is a huge challenge for healthcare.
It's a gigantic challenge. I read articles all the time written by physicians who have left the field. I know people who have left medicine altogether and started businesses just because they did it for the wrong reasons.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, not to get too sidetracked, but you brought up mental health, so I'll run with it. Jack knows me well enough. Give me a chance to change topics. I'll veer left or right. But I had a physician tell me this, and we'll get back onto the student loan track shortly. But I had a physician, practicing physician, also oversees a residency program, so he has those responsibilities. And we were discussing this very topic. And he said, Fred, I will share with you that physicians, to their detriment, will protect their reputation so that they will not open up amongst other physicians about some of the challenges they have of stress, depression, and some of the issues that come with the job. Call it, behavioral health.
Yeah.
And so this was coming from a physician telling me that us, meaning physicians, not me, to their detriment, will protect their reputation beyond anything, because the fear is if it becomes publicly known that that person is dealing with X, Y, or Z, they sense that it's going to sabotage their career. So they get very, very closed about opening up and talking about these issues.
Well, I think that's a very, very crucial point. One of the things that I do insurance. I do disability life insurance. I talk to a lot of people about the mental health aspect because there are certain disability policies out there for physicians that cover mental health completely. It's a very, very critical aspect. However, there are a lot of my physicians that should have been on disability and chose not to. I shouldn't say a lot. I can think of a handful of people who chose not to go that route because of the mental health, because it was mental health and we're protecting the reputation. So I completely understand that. There is a correlation there. I'm not a physician. I'm never going to give medical advice, but I do see the stress. How can you not be stressed when you're working 80 hours a week and you do see some, if you're in the emergency room, you're going to see some horrific things along with some mundane things. It gets to anybody. We're human. We have empathy. They have to protect themselves and they have to take care of themselves first. Because another thing about finance is finance is great, but if we don't have our health, what's all the money there for? What are we doing this for? So it's a big part of my practice. It's a big part of the way I coach, because you need to take care of yourself and your family first. Once we understand that, once we understand why we're doing all this stuff, outside of just helping people, then we have goals, we have direction, we know where we're going, and we can't forget along the way to protect ourselves. One of the things I tell residents, and I'm not a fan of residents investing money. Take the vacations, go out, see, take a break. And you know what? While you're doing that, you might as well take a vacation to areas of the country you want to practice potentially. Start shaking hands with people, network your butt off. I'm sure you guys have talked about this. Sit down for coffee with a practice administrator or a partner and attending somewhere and just say, hey, how'd you guys get here? That stuff works. And that's long run financially, that's going to be more impressive to people.
So let me ask, what are some of the other components of your financial support and assistance that physicians may not be thinking about outside of your expertise in student loans and direction and guidance and consulting? Are there some key things that you feel that typically physicians aren't thinking about that really are important for them to at least be aware of and consider? They may not be thinking some of the long-term components that you need to help them with, or?
Number one, no one really budgets. I mean, some people do. Very few people I run into actually maintain a budget. You can't help yourself if you don't know where you are. All right. You got to have a starting point. Start from the start. So I help people budget and understand where they are, what their starting point is. Number two, a lot of physicians don't like to talk about insurances. And I get it. Insurance sucks to talk about. It's not fun. Like, hey, let's talk about the moment you're going to be disabled. Let's talk about mundane thing or morbid things like death. But it's really, really important. I heard a rumor, and I don't know if this is true, but Kobe Bryant, as God rest his soul, this individual whose billion-dollar enterprise died without a will. There are things out there that people forget because we get so caught up. And I don't know why I brought that up because I was talking about insurances, but
no, it fits.
Creating a will is very important too. People forget to do that because we don't want to think about the bad things. But my goal as an advisor is I have to always plan for the worst case scenario. That way, if the worst case scenario happens, our families are covered. We're covered. If it doesn't, no problem. Not a big deal. We plan for it. All right. Death's always going to happen. Disability, we have to plan for. And I don't think a lot of doctors take private disability insurance seriously. Really big important to student loans is that if we're disabled, and this is getting back onto the original topic, if we're disabled and we can't practice in medicine in our particular specialty, doesn't mean student loans are forgiven. For those loans to be forgiven, we have to be Social Security disabled, essentially meaning we can't practice in any other capacity in any other job or be employed. So you can't flip burgers or, make a mocha at Starbucks. And that's scary, but people don't think about this stuff. So disability, from a personal protection standpoint, is one of the most important things a person can get as it relates to student loans and really your whole life. Because if you don't have an income, none of the stuff that any financial advisor tells you matters at all.
So let me ask, when you coach, consult with, and again, this is the broader platform of what you do, do you help do some long-term planning as well? I had a physician friend of mine that I had the privilege of listening to one of his presentations that he calls the game of life. Mm-hmm. And he's an older man and has experienced a lot, got grandkids, I believe, and has seen the whole spectrum of life. And unfortunately, so many residents first coming out of training, many are thinking about the money they're about to earn, maybe buy bigger than they should because now they can, and there are lenders willing to give them credit. And they're not thinking of, like you had suggested, Kyle, they're not thinking about planning. And this particular physician even mentioned, and I thought it was fascinating, he said, and if you're the only physician in your family, be prepared because your family, he's not referring just to like your own kids, but like your parents and brothers, and you're like the doctor in the family. You're going to be asked to do all kinds of things. So he was trying to give this whole overview of like what it looks like throughout one's lifetime if they're a physician. A lot of it had to do with financial planning and how much do you think you're going to need at the end of the day, depending on what your goals are. And, you know, maybe you don't need the lake. He would say, maybe you don't need the lake house right away. You know, plan moderately. So do you also help try to understand what somebody's vision is? Because people with access to money don't necessarily are thinking clearly about what the long-term repercussions are, and it's more of a live for the moment decision.
It's an easy trap to get into. You know, we tell ourselves, oh, I have the money in the bank account. Perfect. I can spend $100 here on this shirt, or I can drop $250 on this.
Wait a minute. See, now you're thinking like me. All right. I didn't realize you were going to call me out in this hey, video cast.
We can talk after this if you really want to, Fred. I can get you on the straight and narrow.
Okay.
All right. But here's what's going on. Yes, I will look at everything. Our business and our company is full service financial planning for physicians. That's what we started out as 1987. I've been around medicine and the business side of medicine probably longer than most of my clients have been in medicine. Just because that's what I grew up around. I'm 29 years old. I consider myself being in this, actually paying attention for at least the last 2 decades. I mean, I was helping when I was a little kid, but yeah, we'll do everything from the insurance side, the budgeting, the easy stuff early on, all the way up to the long-term care and the final planning, because it's really, really important to us. I mean, we'll tell our clients, learn from us. I mean, my grandfather, here's a perfect example of what you were talking about. My grandfather just passed away in December. All right.
Sorry to hear that.
I appreciate it. You know what? It's a learning point, though. He was in a long-term care facility for about a year and a half before that. And I think the cost was a minimum of $300 a day before and he had to spend down before Medicare picked up. These are things people don't think about. It's extremely, extremely important, especially now with the way healthcare is. We are living longer. We need to start thinking about not for today. We got to think about years and decades down the line, because who knows? I know one thing, I don't want people to have to pay for me in those scenarios. You know, I don't want to be burdening my family. And these are the hard questions that we'll get into. You know, I ask my clients when they come out, all right, fill in this goal sheet. We're going to look and we're going to get down to it. They're fun questions. What vacation do you want to go on next? Where do you want to take your parents? There's some really difficult questions. When do you think you're going to die? It's the question no one wants to answer. That's the reality of it. So yes, we'll do it all. We'll talk about it all. The stuff my firm really doesn't do. We aren't accountants. We can recommend accountants. We have accountants that we deal with, but are separate entities. And the reason why is because we want you to trust what they're saying is not influenced by us. So 2 different companies. Same thing with lawyers and people who read and write contracts. We don't do that. We're not legal. We're not lawyers. We're probably not even legally allowed to write contracts. But what we do is we bring people together and recommend people out. And then if we ever have disagreements, we bring it all back and we can have a civilized conversation about how best to proceed. So
can you think of an example where somebody was really maybe had made some poor decisions that you were able to kind of help them unwind? And I don't know to the extent the options that are afforded, because I don't have your knowledge and your expertise. Once somebody has made some poor decisions, maybe there's only so much you can unwind to help them. But has anything come to mind with a question like that particularly?
There's a lot of things that come to mind.
Just nothing you can repeat on the air, right?
There's a lot of poor decisions. I don't want to repeat them on the air because, if I have people watching,
and they know you're talking about them, right?
I don't have consent yet to share the information, so I would prefer not to.
I wasn't asking for their social security number.
I know. Privacy is super important to me and to my clients. So maybe next time if I talk to people and get that information beforehand. Have we been able to unwind situations like that? Yes. One bad decision, a couple bad decisions don't mean you're going to make bad decisions. It doesn't mean you're going to make bad decisions for the rest of your life. You just have to get on track. Again, it's controlling the thing, and it's going to sound like the serenity prayer, but you got to control the things you can control on a daily basis. Figure out what the problem is. Once we have the problem, we know what we can attack. We know how to attack it, and we can develop a plan of attack to make sure that we get out of the hole that we're in.
So I'm going to ask you a difficult question now, and I know you're going to plead the fifth, but and I can accept that, by the way.
All right.
So this one physician that I'm talking to now made it clear that because this person has so much debt that unless they can find a significantly higher paying job in the for-profit sector, they're sort of leaning towards the not-for-profit because of the public option, if you will. So what are your general thoughts on this doctor isn't a primary care physician that particularly, but let's say somebody's in one of the more moderate income earners.
Yeah.
Family practice. I mean, high income by way of national standards, but by way of medicine, one of the more moderate income earners, right, who is facing $400,000 in debt. Just as a high number.
Yeah.
I'm aware of what that person probably will average over year. Very clear on those numbers. I know you're what do you tell someone like that? Is it really just come down to what's most important to them? Because eventually they will pay it off. It might be, 20 years later than if they took the public loan option. How do you help them, kind of walk through that, because they truly are facing so much pressure and they're looking at their options? How do you help them understand what might be the best pathway for them?
It's not a great answer for what people like to hear, but it really comes down to numbers. Numbers don't lie. We can say, all right, what's the opportunity cost if student loan forgiveness isn't available? If for whatever reason it goes away tomorrow, I'm not saying that it will. I'm not saying that I believe that. But what is that opportunity cost? You took that public job and you took a lower income. And let's assume you work there because there's so many variables that you can play what if around. We have to take three main variables. All right, public service isn't there. You get an income, that income increases. You get an income at the public job, and that caps eventually. No opportunity for partnership. All right. That's typically how the public jobs work. We don't see partnership all that often. But
when you say public, are you referring to like employed by a system?
yeah, essentially the non-for-profits.
Okay, got it.
Typically speaking, the non-for-profits. So there are plenty of opportunities to take a look at that from a numbers aspect. At the end of the day, what I figured out is most times I'm not going to change people's minds who have already been made up whether they want to go public service or not. They either believe in the system or they don't believe in the system. Those who don't typically are going to be more open-minded to private paying jobs. Those who completely believe in the system are going to look at it and they're going to say, all right, this is the way I want to go. Could we fall into traps either way? Yeah. I mean, if public service was a thing, maybe the private people on the other side, if it is a thing and it does come and pay out, maybe the private people on the other side actually lost money on that deal. It's a very, very difficult tightrope to walk in explaining it. I know numbers. That's a way I can deal with it. I try to take the emotion out of it because when you put the emotion into something in a discussion like this, you run down this rabbit hole of, all right, what if? Gosh, is the government going to be there for me? Right now, we have no knowledge that they're not going to be. There's, some people will say, yeah, but there's promissory notes out there for Social Security, and we've been told that our generation isn't going to see Social Security. So how do we expect them to pay off the student debt, the billions and trillions of dollars in student debt?
Good question.
It's a good question. Can you argue that? Yeah, there's no argument until we actually see it come to fruition.
But I like your approach, Kyle. And as soon as you started down the pathway of your answer, it gave me a lot of clarity. And I would probably, if I had your capacity and your know-how, I would probably be the approach, because it comes down to numbers. And I can completely see the emotion and how that can really, it would turn me inside out as far as the rabbit hole you referred to. Yep. And if it's kept to, hey, here are the numbers, here are the options, what are you most comfortable with?
Yep.
And such. So I appreciate that approach for sure.
Fred, what I'll tell you is, for the most part on this stuff, I don't ever make decisions for my clients. I just lay out their options and I tell them, this is what you're faced with. These are the pros and cons of each. Mm-hmm. Once people understand the situation, physicians have the mental capacity to make a decision. They have to do it every day on life-threatening decisions. But more times than not, the issue is that they don't know the options or they don't understand the pros and cons of it. At least on students.
You sound like you've been doing this a while, Kyle.
Yeah, a little bit. I've been around it a lot. Let's put it that way.
How many, in a busy year, how many presentations in front of residencies do you think you make per year? Because I know you do. I know you do. A bit of free lecturing and so forth. So
for the most part, I would say maybe. I'm going to lowball this. Let's just say once a month, I'll go to residencies and lecture, or do it at medical schools. A lot of my time is actually spent in person on the one-on-one meetings, because if I focus so much on the lecture halls, no one's really getting out much of anything out of that pertains to their personal situation. Right. When I'm in a lecture situation like this, I can only give general information. Right. Every individual situation is going to be unique and it's going to be different. I prefer to spend that time really focusing and diving down into individuals' actual the decision-making process and their needs and what's going on with them. So we'll say once a month. It's been a little bit more frequent this year, and it's going to be, but I'll stick with that answer.
Well, the good news is your information will be accessible through the video cast. And so whether it's somebody who would like a one-on-one consult, to your point, or perhaps would like to introduce you to a program coordinator or director and talk to you about coming out and visiting their program, they'll have access to you so that either option will be available to them.
Yep,
So,
all
Shame.
that information would be, sorry, all that information would be in the description below is what I wanted to add.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'll put a shameless plug here. I'm open to either. It's not like I'm closed-minded to anything. Anybody who wants help, I'm willing to provide. That's what I look for. I'm looking for people who really want to learn. And that's really how I choose clients too. Some individuals just aren't right for each other. And I have to make that decision as well for my clients and them, and they have to make it for themselves. What I will say is when I meet people, essentially, my advice is free. I don't charge for a consult. It's not something that I think is right on this stuff. It's not worth saying, hey, here's a bill for sitting down with me. It's not the way we operate. I want to make sure people understand and grasp. And if they like what I have to say, it's all about earning their respect and their trust. That's my philosophy. If I can earn someone's respect and trust, then I've done my job. And that's my goal at the end of the day when I go into meetings. So, all right.
Yeah, you're excellent. Just wanted to say that. That's you are a very good presenter.
Well, thank you very much.
So I know we spoke a lot about repayment and interest rates, but would you say that there are other things to note about student loans kind of outside of that?
Yeah. So I got to backtrack. We've been doing this for a little bit. What have we talked about? Yeah, couple mistakes. All right. So when we were in the income-driven again, selecting the repayment plans a very daunting process for a lot of people because they don't understand what's going on with it, what the different plans are. I mentioned you need to find someone who really understands the ins and outs of the plans. One thing a lot of people forget to do is continuously file their paperwork for the income-driven repayment plans, and that is a huge no-no. You need to do that every year, because if you don't, you essentially are out of that plan. They'll kick you out, and that interest will capitalize. And capitalization isn't a good thing. Typically in the income-driven repayment plans, capitalization is not a thing. For the sake of this, we'll call it compounding. Capitalization and compounding are almost synonymous. And some people don't know what compound interest is, even physicians. So I could explain that and I could get into that. I think for this, I'm going to assume that everybody does know. If you don't know and you want more information, please reach out to me. Other things that people need to know about student loans. We talked about refinancing. We talked about consolidation. We talked about disability as a very important aspect of it. It fitting into the budget. Student loans will impact just about anything. It can impact your retirement goals when you want to retire. So understanding when you want to, how quickly you want to pay off your loans may actually have a direct correlation at when we can retire. And and what standard of living we can have at that point in time. These are all numbers that can be worked out and going through all this stuff. To be honest, I can't remember everything that we talked about tonight.
It was pretty comprehensive. I just wanted to see if there's something, like a pet issue or something. But yeah, this has been great. Just thank you again for coming on.
You're very welcome. Thank you guys for having me. We can talk about other things at other points in time, anytime you want.
Yeah.
So let me ask you one last question, Kyle. So my daughter, who's 24, or she'll be 24 next month. She wanted to go to Europe once for her, like her senior, or fourth year. That was like her graduation present, because all of her friends were going to Europe for
every single one of them.
Every single one. It kind of fell into the category of an earlier time in our relationship where it was, you never let me, all my friends, So we were a little strapped, and I said, well, I just wanted to bring to your attention, honey, that you're leaving college without any student loan debt.
Yeah.
So was I a good dad, Kyle? That was my question. Did I do the right thing by my daughter?
I think you did a pretty damn good job by your daughter. And I will tell anybody that any day, and that's actually a really important point. I'm already planning for future kids' college education, and I'm not even married yet. I don't even have a significant other at this point in time, but I know it's going to be something that I want to pay for. Understanding that even at an early age, it's important to start planning that stuff. And people forget about that because, all right, I'm taking care of myself. No, we got to look at those long-term impacts, because if we can start now, it's not going to be as detrimental when it comes down the line, if that's a goal of yours. When you said Europe, I just laughed, because one of the things a lot of students do, and to my chagrin, I understand it. They'll go and take trips immediately out of medical school and use more student debt for that. And I'm like, oh no, you could have. But hey, you know what? I can't get it all, and I understand. As I said, people need breaks. So they gotta do what they have to do. If it's gonna make their first year of residency a little bit less stressful, who am I to tell them no?
All right, I have to qualify one thing, and then we could probably wrap it up unless we're missing anything. Just in case Mrs. Newmark, my wife, watches this video cast, I need to backtrack and say we paid for our daughter's college.
Yeah, that's important. I can say it. I don't have a significant other. You may get in trouble for that one.
I just had to make an editorial, change there. So, Jack, I am yielding the floor to you, my friend.
I think that's it, and this was quite comprehensive. So thank you. I'm sure we would like to have you back on other issues as well.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to, guys. Thank you so much for having me on. We got into topics I didn't even expect to tonight. So
that's what this is about, Kyle. We like to keep it real, and so thank you. Your breadth of understanding and your ability to communicate, as Jack said earlier, is tremendous. So thank you for engaging with us tonight. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, gentlemen. Well, thank you very much. I hope you guys have a good evening, and good evening to all the listeners, or whenever you guys are watching it, whatever.